Chapter 1, Rebirth in the Shadows. Lena Montrose woke with a gasp, the bitter taste of death still lingering on her lips. Her heart pounded as she shot upright, hands gripping the silk sheets beneath her. This was impossible. She remembered the cold emptiness of her last breath, the dim candlelight flickering as Victor Langley watched her with indifference, her fingers too weak to grasp his sleeve. Yet here she was, alive. She sucked in a shaky breath, the familiar scent of lavender and old parchment filling her nose. This was her childhood bedroom. The antique mirror across from her reflected a face she hadn't seen in years, young, untouched by sorrow. Her dark curls cascaded over her shoulders, her skin free of the pallor of illness. Her fingers trembled as she touched her own cheek. "I've gone back." A knock at the door startled her. "Miss Montrose," a voice called. "Your father requests your presence in the study." Her stomach twisted. She knew what this meant. Today was the day Lord Montrose would deliver the news, her engagement to Victor Langley, sealing her fate in a loveless marriage. But this time, she wouldn't be a pawn. She steadied herself, smoothing her nightgown before stepping into the dimly lit corridor. The Montrose estate had always been a place of fading grandeur, its once pristine halls now coated with dust. Shadows clung to the corners like forgotten ghosts. As she descended the spiral staircase, she could hear her father's voice. "The Langley family has been generous. We owe them everything." Lena stepped into the study, her father seated behind his mahogany desk, hands clasped in front of him. His silvered hair and weary eyes made him look older than she remembered. Beside him stood her stepmother, Lady Eleanor, a woman whose kindness had always been reserved for expensive jewelry and empty flattery. "You called for me." Lena's voice was steady, though inside, her pulse pounded. Her father exhaled. "Victor Langley has proposed." Proposed. The word was a noose. In her past life, she had accepted without hesitation. She had believed it was her duty. But duty had led her to her grave. She lifted her chin. "I refuse." Silence. Lady Eleanor's lips parted in shock. Lord Montrose blinked as if he hadn't heard correctly. "Lena, this is not a choice," her father said finally. "You know what this means for us." Oh, she knew. She knew the Montrose estate was drowning in debt, that Victor Langley had used their desperation to trap her. But this time, she wouldn't play his game. "I will not marry him," she said firmly. Her father's fist slammed against the desk. "You are being foolish." Lena met his gaze. "No, father. For the first time, I am not." She turned on her heel, stepping out of the study, her heart hammering in her chest. In her past life, she had surrendered. This time, she would fight. And the first step? Finding the man who had once loved her, Elias Carter. Chapter 2, A Second Chance at Love. The cold night air bit at Lena's skin as she pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders. The streets of Blackwood were quieter than she remembered, shrouded in mist, lined with flickering gas lamps, the scent of damp stone and fading autumn lingering in the air. Her heart pounded. She knew where she had to go. Elias Carter's bookshop. In her past life, she had ignored his love. She had walked past this very place without a second glance, blinded by duty and fear. By the time she had realized the depth of her mistake, it had been too late. Not this time. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside. The bookshop was exactly as she remembered, dusty shelves stacked with forgotten stories, the air thick with the scent of old parchment and ink. And behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, head bent over a ledger, stood Elias. Her breath caught. He looked exactly as he had a decade ago, his dark hair falling into storm-gray eyes, his sharp features tense with concentration. He was broader than she remembered, his white shirt stretched over the firm muscles of his arms. He hadn't noticed her yet. She took a step closer, the wooden floor creaking beneath her boot. His head snapped up. For a long moment, he simply stared. Then his expression hardened. Lady Montrose. His voice was flat. Unwelcoming. Lena flinched. She had forgotten, he had already given up on her by this point. He had been a friend, once. He had loved her, once. But she had thrown him aside for Victor Langley. She cleared her throat. Elias. His eyes narrowed. What are you doing here? There was no warmth in his gaze. Lena swallowed, her hands tightening into fists. She had imagined this moment differently, maybe a quiet smile, a flicker of hope. But of course he didn't trust her. Why should he? She met his gaze. I need your help. A humorless chuckle escaped his lips. Ah. And here I thought you came for a book. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms. Strange, isn't it? Last time we spoke, you told me we had no future. Guilt twisted inside her. I was wrong. Elias's jaw tightened. And now you come back, expecting what? Forgiveness? No, she whispered. But I can't marry Victor Langley. Something flickered in his eyes, but it vanished just as quickly. And why should I care? Lena hesitated. If she told him the truth, that she had died in that marriage, that she had been reborn, he would think her mad. So she chose another truth. Because I think my mother was murdered, she said. The room seemed to grow colder. Elias's expression shifted, curiosity, skepticism. Murdered? Lena nodded. And I think Victor Langley knows why. Silence. Then, finally, Elias exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Damn it, Lena. He looked at her, something unreadable in his gaze. Tell me everything. Chapter 3, The Locked Diary. Lena sat across from Elias in the dimly lit bookshop, the scent of old parchment and candle wax wrapping around them. Outside, the mist clung to the streets, curling against the windows like ghostly fingers. Elias watched her carefully, arms crossed, his gray eyes filled with skepticism. You expect me to believe that Victor Langley is involved in your mother's death? He asked. Lena hesitated. She couldn't tell him everything, not yet. The truth of her second life would only push him further away. But she could tell him what she remembered from before. My mother's death was never investigated, she said, voice steady. The official story was that she drowned in the lake behind Montrose Manor. But she never went near the water. She feared it. Elias frowned. That's not proof. No, Lena admitted. But I remember something else. She took a shaky breath, the memory unraveling in her mind like a faded ribbon. The night before she died, she was anxious. I found her in the parlor, writing furiously in her journal. When I asked what was wrong, she only said, there are things you don't understand, Lena. Secrets buried deeper than you know. Elias leaned forward. And this journal? It disappeared the night she died. His eyes darkened. You think someone took it? Lena nodded. I searched her chambers after she passed, but it was gone. She swallowed hard. And then, just before my wedding to Victor, he said something strange. Elias raised a brow. What did he say? She clenched her fists. He told me, some secrets are best left buried, my dear. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Elias exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. That's not a coincidence. No, Lena whispered. It's not. He studied her, as if searching for deception. Then, finally, he nodded. If this diary still exists, we need to find it. Relief flooded her. Then you'll help me? Elias sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I must be insane, but yes. A small smile tugged at her lips. But before she could speak, the front door rattled. Both of them froze. Elias stood, his body tense. No one comes this late. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass window. Then. Bang! The door shook violently. Lena's breath caught. Elias grabbed a small dagger from beneath the counter. He motioned for her to stay put as he crept toward the door. Silence. Then. A slip of paper slid beneath the door. Elias hesitated before picking it up. His brows furrowed as he read it. Then, without a word, he handed it to Lena. Her blood ran cold as she read the scrawled message. Stop searching for the past. Or you'll meet the same fate as your mother. Chapter 4, A Warning in Blood. Lena's hands trembled as she held the note. The ink was slightly smudged, as if written in a hurry, but the message was chillingly clear. Stop searching for the past. Or you'll meet the same fate as your mother. A slow, creeping dread slithered through her veins. Elias took the note from her, turning it over. No signature. No indication of who had sent it. Only the unmistakable scent of damp paper and the lingering scent of iron. He swore under his breath. Who else knows you're asking questions? No one, Lena whispered. Except, my father. Elias' expression darkened. And Victor Langley. She swallowed. Yes. A gust of wind rattled the window panes. Outside, the street was empty, the mist swallowing the gaslights in thick tendrils. Whoever had left the note had already disappeared. Lena forced herself to stand straighter. This only proves I'm right. If my mother's death were truly an accident, no one would care that I'm looking into it. Elias exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. Or it means someone is desperate to keep you from digging. He hesitated, then added, desperate people are dangerous, Lena. She met his gaze. So am I. His eyes flickered with something, surprise, maybe respect, but he didn't argue. Instead, he moved to the back of the shop, retrieving a worn leather satchel. If we're doing this, we need to start with your mother's last known whereabouts. You said she was writing in her journal the night before she died. Lena nodded. Then we search her room, Elias said. If the diary was taken, there might still be something left behind. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. Montrose Manor. She hadn't stepped into her mother's chambers since that night. A sharp knock at the door made them both freeze. Elias was faster. He grabbed Lena's wrist, pulling her behind the counter before extinguishing the candlelight. The shop was plunged into darkness. Another knock. This time, louder. Lena's heart pounded. Then, silence. Elias crept toward the window, lifting the curtain just enough to peek outside. His shoulders tensed. What is it? She whispered. Slowly, he stepped back, face grim. They left something. Lena followed his gaze. Outside the door, bathed in the glow of the gas lamp, was a small wooden box. Neither of them moved. Finally, Elias exhaled sharply. Stay here. No. He gave her a look, but she stood her ground. Together, they stepped outside. The night was eerily still. Elias knelt, carefully opening the box. Inside was a white handkerchief, stained with fresh blood. Lena's stomach twisted. Then she saw it, embroidered along the edge, in delicate golden thread, were her mother's initials. A chill ran down her spine. Someone was watching. And they wanted her to know it. Chapter 5, Shadows of Montrose Manor. The blood-stained handkerchief lay in the box like a silent threat. Lena's breath was shallow, her fingers ice-cold as she clutched the edge of her cloak. The golden embroidery, CM, was unmistakable. Her mother's initials. Elias swore under his breath, snapping the box shut. He stood quickly, his sharp eyes scanning the empty street. "We need to leave." Lena barely heard him. Her thoughts swirled, tangled in memories she had buried long ago. Her mother's delicate hands, always warm against her cheek. Her laughter, soft and fleeting, like birdsong. Her final words, "There are things you don't understand, Lena." Someone was trying to scare her away. She straightened, setting her jaw. It wouldn't work. "Elias," she said, her voice steady. "We're going to Montrose Manor. Tonight." His eyes flickered with hesitation. "Lena, whoever left this wants me to stop." She met his gaze. "And that's exactly why I won't." A muscle in his jaw tensed. Then, with a quiet sigh, he gave a single nod. "Fine. But we don't go in unprepared." 15 minutes later, they were riding through the mist-shrouded countryside, the moon casting silver streaks over the barren fields. The road to Montrose Manor was eerily silent, lined with skeletal trees whose branches stretched like grasping hands. The house loomed at the end of the path. Dark. Silent. Waiting. Lena hadn't seen it in over a year. The towering stone mansion stood against the night like a ghost, its once grand windows black and hollow. Ivy strangled the walls, and the iron gates creaked as Elias pushed them open. Memories hit her like a storm. She had grown up here. She had danced in its halls, laughed under its chandeliers. But after her mother's death, the warmth had drained from the walls, leaving only whispers and shadows. Elias touched her arm lightly. "You don't have to do this." She swallowed. "Yes. I do." They stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, the scent of aged wood and forgotten secrets pressing around them. Their footsteps echoed against the marble floors. Lena's fingers trailed over the banister as they climbed the grand staircase. The walls bore portraits of her ancestors, silent, watchful figures whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. At the end of the hall stood her mother's door. Her heart pounded. She reached for the handle. Locked. Elias pulled a small dagger from his belt, slipping it between the doorframe and the latch. A sharp click. The door creaked open. The room was just as she remembered. Velvet curtains, a faint scent of lavender, the grand canopy bed untouched. But something felt wrong. Then she saw it. A single footprint in the dust. Someone had been here. Recently. And they weren't expecting visitors. A floorboard groaned. Lena turned, just in time to see a shadow move behind her. Chapter 6, The Mysterious Visitor. The silence of the room was shattered when Lena felt a sudden pressure at her back. Before she could react, a hand gripped her wrist, yanking her into the cold, shadowed corner of the room. A chill ran down her spine as she struggled to break free, but the grip was firm, unyielding. Her heartbeat echoed in her chest, faster than ever before. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw a flash of steel. Elias moved swiftly, his dagger gleaming faintly in the dim light. "Let her go," he commanded, his voice as cold as the blade at the intruder's throat. The figure didn't move. There was something unnerving about his stillness, like a predator toying with its prey. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The scent of leather and something earthy filled the air as the man's presence loomed over her. But there was something oddly familiar in the way he carried himself, something that twisted her gut in confusion. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound strong. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, his dark eyes studied her, unreadable. Elias's grip on the dagger tightened, urging him to speak. Finally, the man's lips parted. "I didn't expect you to find me so soon," he said, his voice low and raspy, with a touch of something she couldn't place. Lena's stomach twisted as she recognized the voice. "Owen." Elias tensed beside her. "Do you know him?" Owen's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile, but his eyes remained cold. "I never thought I'd see you here, Lena." Her mind raced. Owen was someone from her past, someone who had disappeared without a trace years ago. He had been close to her mother, a figure from her childhood she thought she would never see again. "What do you want?" Lena asked, trying to steady her voice. He took a step forward, causing Elias to lift the blade slightly. But Owen didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. Lena's heart skipped a beat. The notebook was familiar, the very same one her mother had kept with her for years. She'd seen it countless times before. Without a word, Owen tossed it onto the table beside them. Lena reached for it immediately, her hands trembling as she flipped it open. She recognized her mother's writing, fragments of thoughts, memories, and sketches, all scattered across the pages. But as she turned the pages, her eyes froze on one entry. "If you're reading this, Lena, then I've failed you. The truth is far more dangerous than I could have imagined. Protect yourself and trust no one." Lena's breath caught in her throat as the weight of the words sank in. Elias stepped closer, his voice sharp. "What's going on, Owen? What do you know about this?" Owen looked away, as though the weight of his own silence was too much to bear. "More than you realize. Your mother knew something she shouldn't have. Something that led to her death." Lena's blood ran cold. Her mother had been murdered. She had always believed it was an accident, a tragic incident with no deeper meaning. But now, Owen was implying there was more, a much darker secret hidden beneath it all. Elias pressed the dagger harder, his patience thinning. "Who did this? Who killed her?" Owen's gaze flickered to the door, as if searching for something, or someone. "The one she trusted the most. The man you were about to marry." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. "Victor." The room seemed to close in on her, suffocating her with the truth. Before Lena could respond, there was a loud noise from downstairs, something heavy crashing against the ground. The sound of footsteps followed, growing closer with alarming speed. Owen's expression darkened. "We need to go. Now." Elias grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her toward the door. She couldn't process what Owen had just revealed. The world around her was spinning, but one thing was clear, danger was closer than ever, and it was coming for them. Chapter 7, The Escape. The footsteps grew louder, and Lena's pulse quickened. Elias tugged at her arm, pulling her toward the narrow hallway that led to the back of the house. The walls, once familiar, now seemed oppressive, suffocating her with their heavy shadows. Owen followed closely behind, his boots barely making a sound against the creaky floorboards. His face was set, eyes darting back and forth as if anticipating something that wasn't yet visible. Lena couldn't focus on anything other than the racing of her heart. She glanced over her shoulder, the sound of footsteps growing louder with each passing second. "Who's coming?" she whispered urgently. Owen didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the window at the end of the hallway, his hand brushing the glass. "We don't have much time," he muttered under his breath. "If they catch us here, it will be too late." Elias's voice was sharp. Then stop talking and start helping us. Owen's lips thinned into a tight line, but he didn't argue. With a quick glance at the door leading to the stairs, he moved toward a nearby closet, pulling open the door to reveal a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Lena froze, her breath caught in her throat. The compartment. She had forgotten it was there. Her mother had shown it to her once, a secret escape route, meant for emergencies. Owen nodded toward the trapdoor. This is our only way out. We need to move now. Elias wasted no time, pushing the trapdoor open with a grunt and pulling Lena toward the opening. She hesitated, looking back at the hallway, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. But there was no choice. They had no time to waste. Lena crawled down into the narrow passage, her legs stiff from the sudden movement. Elias followed closely behind, and then Owen. The air was musty, filled with the scent of earth and damp wood. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for all three of them to move without brushing against the sides. Lena's mind raced as they moved in silence, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Who was after them? What had her mother uncovered that had led to this moment? And why was Owen, of all people, involved? The tunnel curved sharply to the left, and the faint glow of moonlight ahead promised an exit. Lena pushed forward, her fingers scraping against the rough stone walls as they hurried along. Every footstep, every sound in the distance made her stomach drop. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel. Owen moved first, pulling aside a hidden panel in the stone wall. A blast of cold air greeted them as they stepped out into the night. Lena squinted against the moonlight, her eyes struggling to adjust. They were on the edge of the estate, far from the main house. This way, Owen said, motioning for them to follow. He moved swiftly, and Lena, still in shock, did her best to keep pace. They crossed the open field, the tall grass brushing against Lena's legs. Every rustle in the night seemed to echo like a warning. How far are we going? Elias asked, his voice tense. Owen didn't look back. Far enough to lose them. They won't stop coming after you, Lena. The words hung heavy in the air, suffocating her. Lena stumbled slightly as they neared the edge of the property. Her legs were sore from the frantic escape, and her mind was fogged with questions. There was no clarity, only fear and a mounting sense of dread. She could feel it, the trap was closing in. They had run, but the real battle was just beginning. Suddenly, Owen stopped in his tracks, his body tense as he scanned the horizon. Lena's heart skipped a beat. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with calculated precision. Victor. His presence sent a cold shiver down Lena's spine. He was the one who had been after her mother, the one she had trusted, once. But now, he was the man who wanted to destroy everything. Victor's eyes found hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. What do you want from me? Lena demanded, her voice shaky but defiant. Victor's lips curled into a cold smile. I want the truth, Lena. And you're the key to unlocking it. Chapter 8, Unraveling the Truth. The moonlight bathed the field in an eerie glow, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. Lena's breath came in ragged gasps as she faced Victor, her mind racing with 1,000 questions that threatened to choke her. Elias stood at her side, his stance defensive, his hand hovering near the concealed knife at his waist. Owen, too, was poised, his expression unreadable. Victor took a slow step forward, his gaze fixed on Lena with an intensity that made her skin crawl. You don't understand, do you? His voice was smooth, almost mocking. You think you're running from me, but you're just running from the truth. Lena's pulse quickened, and she tightened her grip on the collar of her coat, trying to steady her nerves. What truth? What are you talking about? Victor's lips curled into a knowing smile. Your mother knew something that would have brought everything to the surface. She couldn't protect you anymore, Lena. She couldn't protect herself either. Her heart stuttered in her chest. Stop it, she said, her voice trembling. My mother died in a car accident. That's all. There's nothing else. Victor's eyes darkened, his smile fading into something far more sinister. You think it was an accident? You think she just fell? No, Lena. She was taken from you because she knew too much. She was killed, and you were left in the dark. Lena's hands trembled, her mind struggling to process the gravity of his words. She had always believed the story. She had always accepted the official explanation, the car accident, the abrupt end to her mother's life. But what if that wasn't the truth? What if the real story had been hidden from her, buried so deep that even she couldn't find it? What are you saying? She whispered, the words barely forming in her mouth. Victor took another step, closing the distance between them. I've been watching you, Lena. I've been waiting for the right moment to reveal it all. You have no idea who your mother really was, do you? She wasn't just a simple woman caught in a tragic accident. She was part of something much darker, something that you're now tied to. Lena felt a cold chill settle over her. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to scream at him to stop. But deep down, she knew there was some twisted truth to his words. Elias stepped forward, his voice steady but laced with fury. Enough. We're not here to listen to your lies, Victor. If you think for a second you can manipulate her again. Victor raised a hand, silencing him. I'm not lying, Elias. The truth is that Lena has inherited a legacy. A legacy tied to power, deceit, and betrayal. Lena's thoughts spun. Legacy? Her? How was that even possible? I don't want any part of this, she said, her voice shaking, yet resolute. Whatever it is, I don't want to be involved. Victor's gaze softened for a moment, and his tone turned almost coaxing. You don't have a choice. You're already in this, Lena. You always have been. Lena's mind flashed to the mysterious notebook Owen had given her earlier, her mother's cryptic message. If you're reading this, Lena, then I've failed you. Had her mother known? Had she been preparing Lena for this moment, for the truth she would have to face? She turned her eyes to Elias, who was watching Victor with a mixture of suspicion and caution. Owen, too, seemed distant, his face unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a hint of regret, as if he knew exactly what Lena was about to face. You're not alone, Elias said quietly, his hand brushing her arm in a gesture of reassurance. We'll figure this out, Lena. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Lena took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. There was no turning back now. The truth was out there, and whether she liked it or not, she had to find it. Victor's eyes gleamed, satisfaction flickering in them. You can try to run, Lena, but the more you resist, the more it will cost you. Owen stepped forward now, his voice quiet but firm. He's right. We can't keep running. We have to uncover the truth, or else we'll all be dragged into this. Lena's gaze flicked between the two men, Victor, with his haunting, cryptic words, and Owen, who had shown up out of nowhere with his own secrets. I don't know who to trust anymore, she whispered, her voice breaking. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and steady. Trust yourself. The truth is buried, but we'll dig it out together. We'll find it, Lena. I promise. The wind rustled through the trees as a distant howl echoed in the night, like a warning from the shadows. The tension hung thick in the air, and Lena could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had no choice but to face what was coming. But the question was, would she survive it? Chapter 9, The Unraveling. The night seemed to stretch on forever as they walked in silence. The cool air whipped around them, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the promise of rain. Lena's mind was clouded, weighed down by Victor's words, by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Every step felt like it carried them deeper into a world she didn't understand, a world she wasn't sure she was ready to face. They walked through the dense forest that bordered the estate, the trees looming like silent sentinels. The path was narrow, barely visible under the cloak of darkness. Elias moved ahead, his eyes scanning the shadows, always on guard. Owen walked beside Lena, his presence oddly reassuring, though his silence only added to the tension. Lena's heart pounded in her chest, her thoughts racing. Her mother's death had always been a mystery, but until now, she had never suspected foul play. Now, with Victor's cryptic words ringing in her ears, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had believed in was a lie. "Owen," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, "what is it? What did my mother know? What was she involved in?" Owen glanced at her, his face shadowed by the moonlight. "I wish I could tell you everything, Lena," he said quietly, "but the truth is dangerous. Your mother's legacy isn't something you can easily escape." Lena felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean, my mother's legacy?" Owen didn't answer immediately, his gaze distant as if he were searching for the right words. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost regretful. "Your mother was involved in something that went beyond just her. She wasn't just a victim, Lena. She was part of something much bigger." Lena's breath caught in her throat. What was she a part of? Owen stopped walking and turned to face her. The tension in the air was palpable. "I can't tell you everything yet," he said, his eyes dark with something she couldn't quite place. "But what I can tell you is that she was trying to protect you. She wanted to keep you away from this world, but now, you're caught in the middle of it." Lena shook her head, trying to make sense of his words. "What world? What is this all about?" Before Owen could respond, Elias suddenly stopped and motioned for them to be quiet. "Someone's following us," he muttered. Lena froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She scanned the darkness around them, but saw nothing. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. Elias's eyes narrowed. "We need to keep moving." They picked up their pace, their footsteps quickening as they moved deeper into the woods. Lena could hear the crunch of leaves underfoot, the rapid beating of her heart in her ears. She could feel someone, or something, closing in on them, watching their every move. As they approached a clearing, Owen grabbed Lena's arm and pulled her aside, signaling for silence. She could barely breathe, the fear tightening around her chest. From the corner of her eye, she saw Elias slipping behind a tree, his silhouette blending into the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, stepping into the clearing. The man was tall, cloaked in a dark coat, his face obscured by the shadows. His movements were deliberate, confident, like someone who knew exactly where they were and what they were doing. Lena's pulse quickened as the man stepped closer. He was looking directly at her now, his gaze cold, calculating. "Victor sent me," the man said, his voice low and clipped. "You've made a mistake, Lena. There's no running from this." Lena's stomach twisted in knots. She had no idea who this man was, but the threat in his voice was unmistakable. Before she could respond, Owen stepped forward, his body tense. "Leave her alone," Owen said, his voice barely above a growl. "This is between you and me." The man smirked. "It's too late for that. Lena is already involved. You've all been marked." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "Marked?" she repeated, her voice shaky. The man's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "There's no escaping it now. The game has already begun." Elias stepped out from behind the tree, his eyes locked on the man. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp. The man's gaze flickered to Elias, a brief flash of recognition crossing his face. "You don't know me, but I know you," he said. "I know what you've been doing behind closed doors." Elias's jaw tightened, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. "What do you want?" The man took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Lena's. "Victor wants her, and he's not going to stop until he gets what he's owed." Lena's mind raced. "What does Victor want from me? What does he owe you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he nodded to the side, signaling something, or someone. Lena's stomach lurched. She turned to see a group of men emerging from the woods, their faces hidden in the shadows. The situation was spiraling out of control. "You need to come with us, Lena," the man said, his tone final. "It's too dangerous for you here." Lena looked at Owen and Elias, fear and uncertainty flooding her. They were surrounded, and the weight of the situation pressed down on her chest like a heavy stone. Owen stepped in front of her, his eyes hard. "We'll never let you take her." The man smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see about that." Chapter 10, A Price to Pay. The woods fell into a tense silence as the group of men surrounded them. Lena's heart was pounding so loudly in her chest that it was almost impossible to hear anything else. She could feel the cold sweat on her skin, the sharp bite of fear curling through her every nerve. The man who had spoken to them earlier stepped closer, his face still hidden in the shadows, his figure tall and imposing. "We don't want to hurt you, Lena," the man said, his voice dripping with false calm. "But we will if we have to." Lena took a step back, glancing at Elias and Owen. Elias stood rigid, his hand tight around the knife's handle, while Owen's posture was equally tense, his eyes darting from the man to the group closing in around them. Lena's mind raced. She had no idea who these men were or what they wanted with her, but one thing was clear, they weren't leaving without something. The sense of danger was overwhelming, and the thought of being dragged away in the night made her stomach churn. "What do you want from me?" Lena asked, her voice shaking but defiant. She wasn't going to let them see her fear. The man in the shadows gave a slow, deliberate smile. "Victor's request is simple, he wants you back. You've been away for far too long." Lena felt her blood run cold at the mention of Victor. The name alone sent a chill down her spine, as if it carried a weight of something dark, something she didn't fully understand. She turned to Owen, her eyes searching his face for answers. Owen's jaw clenched, his expression unreadable. He stepped forward, standing between her and the men. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said firmly. The man's smile widened. "You're in no position to stop us, Owen," he replied. "You've been playing your own dangerous game for too long. We both know how this ends." Lena's breath caught in her throat. There was a history here, one she hadn't been privy to. Owen's past, his connection to these men, was something much deeper than she had imagined. She could feel the tension in his body, the way he was poised to strike at any moment. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Then, as if on cue, Elias moved. In a flash, he had closed the distance between him and the nearest man, his knife flashing in the moonlight. A sharp cry split the air as the man staggered back, clutching his side. Blood stained the ground in a dark pool. "Go!" Elias shouted, his voice raw with urgency. "We need to move now." Without thinking, Lena grabbed Owen's arm and pulled him towards the woods. They ran, the sound of footsteps pounding behind them, the growl of the men in pursuit. She didn't know where they were going, only that they couldn't stop. Not yet. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the trees a blur as they pushed through the thick underbrush. Lena's lungs burned with the effort, but she couldn't slow down. She couldn't let them catch her. Not after everything that had happened. Owen, she gasped, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. What did Victor mean by all of this? What do they want from me? Owen's face was grim, his eyes flicking over his shoulder as they ran. Victor is part of something much bigger than you can imagine, he said, his voice low. You're not just a victim in this, Lena. You're the key. The key to what? Lena asked, panic rising in her chest. Owen's expression hardened. You'll understand soon enough. They ran for what felt like hours, until finally, they reached the edge of the woods. The moon was now fully risen, casting an eerie glow over the clearing. Ahead of them lay an old, abandoned building, something Lena hadn't seen before. Its broken windows stared at them like dark, empty eyes. Elias reached the building first, his breath ragged. This way, he urged, motioning for them to follow. Lena hesitated, looking over her shoulder. The sound of footsteps was growing closer again, the men from earlier hot on their heels. They didn't have much time. Without another word, she followed Elias into the building. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the smell of decay. The floor creaked beneath their feet as they moved further into the depths of the building. This place is a maze, Elias muttered, his hand on his knife, his eyes darting around the shadows. Stay close. If they catch us here, we'll never get out. They moved cautiously, deeper into the building, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. Lena's nerves were on edge, every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind through the broken windows, heightening her sense of danger. As they rounded a corner, Lena froze. In front of them, standing in the dim light, was the last person she had expected to see. Victor. His tall frame leaned casually against a wall, his face half hidden in the shadows. His eyes locked onto Lena's, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Lena, he said softly, his voice smooth, almost soothing. I was hoping you'd come. Chapter 11, The Truth Unraveled. Lena's heart raced as she stood frozen in place, her eyes locked on Victor. His presence was suffocating, like the air had thickened with a weight she couldn't shake off. There was something in the way he looked at her, cold, calculating, but also strangely familiar. It was the look of a man who had seen her as a piece in a much larger game, and now the pieces were finally falling into place. What do you want from me, Victor? Lena's voice was steady, but her hands trembled at her sides. She didn't trust herself not to break down under the pressure of his gaze. Victor took a slow step forward, the light from the broken windows casting shadows across his sharp features. He was tall, dark-haired, with a presence that seemed to consume the room. His eyes, though, were the most unsettling part, the way they pierced through her, like he could see everything she was hiding. I want you to understand, Lena, he said softly, his voice smooth as velvet. You don't have a choice in this anymore. The past has a way of catching up with us. You can't run from it. You're already too deep in it. Lena felt a chill crawl up her spine. Too deep in what? Victor's lips curled into a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. In everything. Your family's legacy. The secrets your mother buried. The ones she never wanted you to know. At his words, Lena's blood ran cold. Her mother had always been so protective of her, keeping her away from the darker parts of their past. What had she hidden from Lena? And why had she never told her about it? Elias moved closer to her, his hand brushing against hers as a silent gesture of reassurance. Victor, whatever you want from her, it's not going to happen. She's not a pawn in your game anymore. Victor's eyes flicked to Elias, a brief flicker of amusement crossing his face. You still don't get it, do you? He said, his voice laced with disdain. You think you can protect her? You're just as trapped as she is. All of you are. Lena's mind raced. She had always known there were pieces to her family's history she didn't understand, but this was more than she could have ever imagined. The unease in her chest turned into something much darker, as if the walls around her were closing in. I'm done running from my past, Lena said, her voice gaining strength. I don't care what it is. I'm going to face it. But not on your terms. Victor's smile faltered slightly, but then he leaned in, his voice low, dangerous. You think you're in control, Lena. You think you have a choice. His eyes bored into hers, dark and unyielding. You don't. Before Lena could respond, a loud crash echoed from deeper within the building. The sound of heavy footsteps grew closer. Victor's expression darkened. Looks like we're not alone, he muttered under his breath. In an instant, the room was filled with more figures, their movements swift and silent. Lena's pulse quickened as she recognized the familiar faces, men from earlier, the ones who had chased them through the woods. But these men weren't alone. They were with someone else. Lena's heart dropped into her stomach as a tall figure stepped forward. The man was older, with dark eyes that gleamed with authority. He was wearing a suit, his posture confident and deliberate. The moment his gaze met Lena's, she felt a strange mix of recognition and dread. Lena, the man said, his voice cold, as if he were addressing a stranger. I'm glad you finally made it. She swallowed hard, trying to make sense of the situation. Who are you? The man smiled, but it was a smile that held no warmth. Let's just say I'm someone who's been watching over you for quite some time. Your family's history is more complicated than you think. Lena glanced at Elias and Owen, her mind reeling from the weight of his words. She felt trapped, surrounded on all sides by people who knew things she didn't. Secrets were coming to the surface, but nothing made sense. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and defiance. What do you want with me? The man's expression didn't waver. We're not the ones who want something from you, Lena. You're the one who's been keeping secrets. Secrets that could destroy everything you've ever known. Lena felt the ground beneath her feet shift, the weight of his words sinking in. There was so much more to this than she could possibly comprehend. The threads of her family's past were unraveling in front of her, and she had no idea how far this web stretched. You're a part of this, Lena, the man continued, his voice growing colder. You always have been. Chapter 12, The Heart of the Truth. The room felt like it was closing in around Lena, the walls pressing tighter with every word the man spoke. She glanced at Elias and Owen, their faces reflecting the same mix of confusion and dread that churned inside her. Whatever was happening, they were all in it now. Who are you? Lena asked again, her voice sharper this time, though her hands trembled at her sides. Why are you threatening me with my family's past? The man's lips curled into a thin smile, his eyes glinting with some unreadable emotion. He stepped closer, moving like he owned the space around them. You really don't remember me, do you, Lena? He said softly, but there was an edge to his voice. I'm not surprised. You were just a child when I last saw you. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Something in the pit of her stomach twisted, a memory resurfacing that she couldn't quite grasp. She felt the weight of his words, like they were unlocking something she had long buried. You know me? She asked, her mind racing. She searched his features, trying to pull any shred of recognition from the depths of her memory, but it remained a void. The man nodded slowly, as if she were finally catching up. Yes. I was your mother's oldest friend. Before everything went wrong. Before she changed her name. Before your father's disappearance. His voice dipped lower, almost as though the words themselves were dangerous. Before your family turned its back on me. Lena's heart skipped a beat, the room spinning as the pieces of her fractured past began to fall into place. My mother, what did she hide? What was so terrible that she had to erase it all? Victor, still standing by the window, shifted. His expression was unreadable. Your mother made choices, Lena, he said quietly, almost regretfully. Choices that led us here. That led to your family's downfall. Lena's pulse quickened, her hands gripping the edge of a nearby table. What did she do? What's the secret you're all trying to drag me into? The man, whose name Lena still didn't know, tilted his head slightly. You want the truth, Lena? His voice dropped to a near whisper. Your mother was part of something much bigger. Something she was forced into. And when she tried to leave, she left us behind. Left us? Owen interjected, stepping forward. What are you talking about? Who's us? The man's gaze flicked to Owen, his eyes hardening for a moment. You're not ready for this. None of you are. Victor let out a low laugh from across the room, breaking the tension. None of you ever are you? Lena clenched her fists at her sides, trying to hold on to some sense of clarity amidst the chaos. Just tell me everything, she demanded, her voice tinged with both fear and fury. What is it that you think I don't know? What does this have to do with my family? The man sighed deeply, almost pityingly. You're not the first one to ask, Lena. And you won't be the last. But the truth? It's a heavy burden to bear. Especially when you're just beginning to understand it. He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. Then, his eyes narrowed, and the air seemed to grow even colder. Your mother's involvement with the Arkham Society wasn't by choice. It was by necessity. Your father's death wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated. And you, Lena, you were never meant to inherit anything. Your birth was the last mistake your mother made. Lena's knees threatened to give way beneath her, the shock of his words sinking in like a stone in her chest. The Arkham Society? The death of her father? Was it all connected? Her entire life felt like it had been a lie, a story told to her by a woman who had kept so many secrets, buried so much of the truth. No, Lena whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. No, this isn't possible. My mother would have never. The man's eyes were cold now, unblinking. Your mother tried to protect you, but the truth always has a way of finding its way to the surface. And now, you're part of it, Lena. Whether you like it or not. Victor took a step forward, his face a mask of dark satisfaction. It's time to choose, Lena. You can keep running, keep pretending that you're untouched by all of this. Or you can face the truth and take your place in the legacy your mother left behind. It's up to you. Lena felt a sense of vertigo, the ground beneath her feet shifting in a way that left her unsteady. The future that had once seemed so clear, the path she thought she could follow, was now an unrecognizable mess. She had a choice, but no matter what she chose, she would never be the same. Elias moved to her side, his voice soft but firm. We'll get through this, Lena. Together. You don't have to face it alone. Lena looked at him, her chest tight with emotion. He was right. She didn't have to face it alone. But the truth? The truth might tear everything apart. I'll make my choice soon, Lena said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. But first, I need to understand everything. I need to know who I'm dealing with. The man smirked. You'll learn soon enough, Lena. You're already deep in it. Chapter 13, The Web Tightens. Lena couldn't shake the weight of the words spoken in that dimly lit room. Every sentence seemed to burrow deeper into her mind, each truth dragging her further from the life she once knew. The Arkham Society. Her father's death. Her mother's secrets. Was she truly ready to face it all? Her body felt like it was moving through quicksand, slow and heavy. Elias's presence beside her was a tether to something stable, but even he couldn't seem to ease the gnawing uncertainty eating at her. She turned her head toward him, meeting his gaze. "We'll find the answers, Lena," Elias murmured, as though reading her thoughts. His hand brushed hers in reassurance, his fingers warm and steady. "Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." Lena nodded, forcing herself to believe it. But deep down, a storm raged, and it wasn't just about finding answers. It was about who she would become in the process. Victor led them back to the estate, where they were met by the same cold, sterile atmosphere that had greeted them upon arrival. The estate loomed, casting long shadows over the overgrown gardens, its windows dark, like the eyes of a forgotten soul. It had always felt off to Lena, but now, it felt like a prison she couldn't escape from. She was tied to this place, tied to a legacy that was slowly suffocating her. As they entered the grand hall, a heavy silence descended, broken only by the soft echo of their footsteps against the marble floors. Owen, ever the skeptic, had been strangely quiet since the confrontation. Lena could tell something was eating at him, but he wouldn't speak. Instead, he moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the room, looking for something, anything, to make sense of the chaos. "Do you know what the Arkham Society is?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She hadn't spoken much to Owen after the meeting, but now the words felt necessary, the air too thick with unsaid things. Owen paused, his eyes flicking to hers. "I've heard of it." But, he stopped himself, frowning. "Lena, what if we're making a mistake by pushing too hard? What if we're digging up something we're not supposed to find?" Lena's heart twisted at the thought. But deep inside, she knew they had no choice. If her family's history was connected to something dark, then she had to understand it. For herself, for her father, and for whatever was left of the life she thought she had. Before Lena could respond, the doors to the study swung open, revealing a figure she didn't expect to see. "Lena," said the woman who stepped into the room, her voice sharp yet familiar. "We need to talk." Lena froze. Her mother. But it couldn't be her mother. Not the way she remembered. The woman standing before her wasn't the mother who had raised her with quiet love, the woman who had protected her from everything. This version of her mother was cold, calculating, and somehow, different. "You," Lena's voice faltered, the shock too much to bear. "What's going on? Why are you here?" Her mother's eyes flicked to Elias and Owen, measuring them before settling back on Lena. "I'm not the woman you think I am," she said, her tone almost too calm, too controlled. "Everything you've been told has been a lie." Lena's pulse quickened. Every nerve in her body screamed for answers, but the room felt too small for the enormity of the questions filling her mind. "What do you mean? What's happening?" Her mother stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. "The Arkham Society isn't just some secret club. It's a network. A web that stretches far beyond your understanding. And you, Lena, have been caught in it from the very beginning." Lena's breath hitched. The air around her thickened, as though the walls themselves were closing in. "We wanted to protect you," her mother continued, her voice suddenly softer. "But the time for protection is over. You're a part of this now, whether you like it or not." "Why?" Lena's voice cracked with desperation. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me about any of this?" Her mother's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, but the hardness returned just as quickly. "Because there are forces at work here that you cannot begin to understand. And if you start digging too deep, you'll become just like your father." The words struck Lena like a physical blow. Just like her father. What had happened to him? What had he uncovered before he died? "You don't know the truth," her mother whispered, as if to herself. None of us do. Not yet. The silence that followed was suffocating, the weight of what was left unsaid too much to bear. Lena's thoughts raced, spinning in every direction, as if her entire life had been a carefully constructed lie. And now, the truth was coming for her, unbidden and unrelenting. Elias stepped forward, his protective instinct flaring. "Lena, we need to leave this place. It's not safe." Lena's heart beat erratically in her chest, torn between the desire for escape and the need to uncover the truth. "No, Elias. I can't leave now. I need to know." Her mother looked at her, something flickering in her eyes. "You're stronger than you realize, Lena. But the truth comes with a cost. Are you willing to pay it?" Lena's mind screamed for answers, but deep down, she knew she was already too far in. The web had tightened around her, and there was no escaping it now. Chapter 14, The Crossroads. The heavy silence that had fallen in the wake of her mother's words felt like a suffocating fog. Lena's pulse hammered in her ears, drowning out everything else. The room, once a place of safety and comfort, had turned into a chamber of secrets and hidden truths. Her mother's cold demeanor seemed to mock her, as though all the years of love and devotion were just another mask, easily discarded when the real world called for something darker. "I can't just walk away," Lena whispered, her voice hoarse as if the weight of her decision already pressed on her chest. Her heart raced. The idea of leaving, of running away, felt like betrayal. Her mother, Elias, Owen, they all seemed to be pushing her toward a precipice, each with their own agenda, but the truth she sought had become something far more elusive than she could have imagined. Her mother's eyes flicked toward Elias, then Owen, before landing back on Lena. "You think you can control this? You think you can just ask the right questions and get the answers you want?" Her voice was low, almost mocking, but there was an edge to it that sent a chill down Lena's spine. "You're too close to the heart of the web now. The answers you seek may destroy you." Lena swallowed hard, the weight of those words sinking in. She was caught between two worlds, one she had known and one that was unraveling before her very eyes. The Arkham Society. Her family's legacy. The truth about her father's death. Was it possible to understand it all, or was she just setting herself up to fall? "No one can protect you anymore," her mother added, her eyes narrowing with something darker, fear, maybe, or something more dangerous. "Not from them. Not from what's coming." Lena stood frozen, unsure whether to confront her mother or demand the truth. She could feel Elias's presence beside her, a steadying force in the chaos, but even he seemed uncertain, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the room for any danger she couldn't see. "We need to get out of here," Elias finally said, his voice firm but laced with urgency. "This place, your family's estate, it's not just haunted by the past. It's dangerous. All of it." Lena wanted to agree. She wanted to leave, to put all of this behind her and live a life free from secrets and lies. But a part of her, the part that had always sought answers, that had always been driven by an insatiable curiosity, refused to let go. She couldn't turn back now. "I can't leave," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. "Not until I know the truth." Her mother's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lena saw a flicker of something human in her eyes, guilt, perhaps, or remorse. "Then you'll have to face it. All of it. The past, the truth, and the consequences." Lena's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know if she was ready for whatever this was leading to, but she knew one thing: it was too late to turn back. The choice had been made. The journey had begun, and the end was unclear. But one thing was certain: the closer she came to uncovering the truth, the more her life seemed to slip out of her control. Lena took a deep breath, her chest rising with determination. She would not let fear dictate her fate. Not now, not when the stakes were so high. But as she turned to leave the study, the sudden sound of footsteps behind her made her freeze. She spun around to see Owen, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "You're making a mistake," Owen said, his voice hoarse. All of this. It's too much, Lena. You can't take this on alone." Lena's throat tightened as she looked at him. "I have to," she whispered. "I don't have a choice." For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, their gazes locked, and the weight of what had happened hung between them, heavy and suffocating. "I can't stop you," Owen said finally, his voice strained. "But I won't stand by and watch you destroy yourself." Lena's eyes softened. She didn't want to lose Owen, didn't want to lose the friendship they had once shared. But the path she had chosen was her own to walk. It had to be. "I'm sorry," she whispered. With that, she turned away, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall as she made her way toward the unknown. As she walked, the shadows grew longer, the estate stretching out before her like a dark labyrinth of secrets waiting to be unearthed. The air felt thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that, in some twisted way, the answers she sought were waiting for her at the heart of this darkness. And it was there, at the crossroads of her past and her future, that Lena would face the greatest decision of her life. Love or justice? Escape or confrontation? Truth or lies? The choice was hers, but the consequences would shape her destiny forever. Chapter 15, The Final Reckoning. The mansion loomed like a shadow, its ancient stones whispering secrets of the past. Lena stood at its entrance, her hand trembling on the doorknob. The familiar cold, the dimly lit hallways, the air thick with history, it all felt too heavy, too much to bear. Yet, there was no turning back. She had come too far. The truth, whatever it was, needed to be faced. As she pushed the door open, the sound of creaking would echoed in the silence, a warning perhaps, or simply the remnants of a forgotten time. The estate had always been her home, but tonight it felt foreign, like a place she was never meant to be. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The walls seemed to close in around her, and the flickering candlelight cast long shadows that twisted and danced like ghosts from another age. The air was heavy with the scent of dust, old leather, and something faintly metallic, as if the house itself had borne witness to countless betrayals over the years. Her thoughts raced, a whirlwind of emotions and half-formed conclusions. Elias, Owen, her mother, all of them had tried to protect her in their own ways, but none of them could shield her from the truth. She had spent so long running from it, hiding behind love and family, but now she stood at the edge of it all, staring into the abyss. The sound of footsteps from behind startled her. She turned quickly, her heart pounding, but it was just Elias. His eyes, dark and unreadable, followed her as she walked further into the house. "You should be careful," he said softly, his voice low and laced with concern. "This place, it's not what you think." Lena shot him a look, frustration and defiance flashing across her face. "Then what is it? What's the real story, Elias? Who am I really?" He hesitated, his gaze flicking to the old portraits hanging on the walls, their painted eyes following him like ghosts of the past. "The truth isn't as simple as you think. It never is. But whatever you decide, know that it's not just your life on the line." Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't need him to elaborate. She understood. It was never just about her. This tangled web of secrets, lies, and family history had never been a solo affair. She was bound by blood, by loyalty, and by an invisible thread that tied her to this cursed estate. Without another word, she turned and walked deeper into the mansion, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She could feel Elias's presence behind her, always watching, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. She had to know. She had to finish this, even if it meant breaking everything she held dear. As she reached the library, the heart of the mansion's mysteries, Lena's pulse quickened. The door creaked open slowly, and she stepped inside. The room was vast, lined with rows upon rows of old, dusty books. The scent of parchment and ink hung in the air, an intoxicating mix of knowledge and forgotten memories. It was here that the secrets of her family had been hidden for generations. The truth, buried under centuries of lies, was within her reach. Her fingers brushed against the spine of a thick, leather-bound book as she walked toward the center of the room. She could almost hear the whispers of the past, beckoning her to open it, to unveil the darkness that had been sealed away. But before she could reach for it, a voice, harsh and urgent, cut through the silence. "Lena," Elias's voice rang out, sharp with panic. "Don't." But it was too late. Her hand closed around the book, and as she opened it, a rush of memories flooded her mind. Visions of her father, of her mother, of the Arkham Society and its twisted history. The secrets she had uncovered were more than just her family's sins, they were the foundation of everything that had brought her to this point. The truth was ugly. It was a betrayal so deep, so profound, that it shattered the last illusions of safety Lena had clung to. Her father's death wasn't an accident. It was murder. And it wasn't just any murder, it was orchestrated by the very people she had trusted most, including her mother. Tears sprang to her eyes as she absorbed the gravity of what she had just learned. Her mind reeled, her body trembling from the shock. The betrayal had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of false affection and carefully constructed lies. As the weight of it all crashed down on her, Lena's world tilted, and for a moment, everything seemed to blur. The mansion, Elias, even the truth itself, it all felt distant, like a dream she couldn't wake up from. And then, she saw him, Owen, standing in the doorway. His eyes were wide with shock, his face pale as he took in the scene. "Lena, what have you done?" His voice was thick with fear and disbelief. Her heart lurched. "I had to know, Owen. I had to." He stepped forward, his gaze flickering between her and the open book. "This isn't just about you anymore. This is about all of us. You can't undo what's been done." Lena's voice trembled as she met his gaze. "I don't know what to do. I thought I could fix everything, but now I'm just lost." Owen closed the distance between them, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Lena. I'll help you. We'll figure this out together." Lena's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, to believe that everything could be salvaged. But in her heart, she knew it would never be that simple. She had uncovered a web of lies too tangled to untangle, and now, the consequences were inevitable. The final choice was hers. She could confront her mother, tear down everything she had built, and seek justice for the crimes committed. Or she could turn away, try to forget the truth, and live with the knowledge that her silence would perpetuate the cycle of corruption. In that moment, Lena realized that the hardest part wasn't the truth, it was what she would do with it. What will Lena choose? Will she expose the dark secrets of her family, shattering the illusion of safety she's lived in, or will she protect the ones she loves, even if it means living with the weight of this terrible truth? The story is far from over. As Lena faces the most difficult decision of her life, the stakes grow higher with every passing moment. If you've been hooked by the twists and turns of Lena's journey, stay tuned for what's next. The final chapters will unravel even more shocking truths that could change everything. Make sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion to this intense, suspense-filled saga. Comment below your thoughts on Lena's decision. Should she seek justice, or is it better to keep the past buried? Call to action. What will Lena choose? Will she expose the dark secrets of her family, shattering the illusion of safety she's lived in, or will she protect the ones she loves, even if it means living with the weight of this terrible truth? The story is far from over. As Lena faces the most difficult decision of her life, the stakes grow higher with every passing moment. If you've been hooked by the twists and turns of Lena's journey, stay tuned for what's next. The final chapters will unravel even more shocking truths that could change everything. Make sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion to this intense, suspense-filled saga. Comment below your thoughts on Lena's decision. Should she seek justice, or is it better to keep the past buried?